Hey everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia, back with another episode of the JungleRoar podcast, and it is my pleasure to welcome back, it's been a while, the one and only Paul Dehner Jr., doing tremendous work for The Athletic, covering the Cincinnati Bengals and the NFL. You can follow him on Twitter. Many of you already are, of course, I'm sure, at Paul Dehner Jr., all one word. Paul, welcome back. It's been a while.
It has been a while, Trags, and my feelings are hurt.
It
And
won't be
I
that
feel
long
I've
the next
taken it
time.
personally, even though maybe you didn't mean it to be personal. The fact that it has been this long since I've been back on the podcast, I've been trying to be nice.
Here's
I've been trying
okay.
to. I've been trying. Maybe I said something or did something, but I'm just happy to be back and know that we're back. I'm back in the good graces.
Here's the deal. I know you're an extraordinarily busy human being
Oh,
covering the
okay.
NFL and the Bengals.
Well,
And
sure. I
there's news
appreciate. I
every
appreciate.
single day on the stripes.
Hey,
Paul,
there,
I
there it
get
is.
that. So I don't want to infringe not only upon your professional time, but your personal time. You have a lovely family. You also, I might be taking you out to dinner based on
True.
what might be happening in the next 2 days. So here's a
True.
backstory before we get to all the Bengal talk. It was OTAs, I believe.
It's a while back.
Yeah, it had to be back in the OTAs, or maybe it was even actually, you know what, Paul? I think it was around the draft. It
It's how
would,
far back this went. It was right
yeah,
around 3-22. I mean,
it
it
was
was
right
like,
around 3-22. That's correct, which would put it right around when they were in the midst of that 3-22 black hole.
yes.
Um, that would be the NFL draft, April 28th, 29th, and 30th. And I said to Paul, no way they're losing 100. Just it's 25 games. There's no way this team is that bad that they're going to lose 100 games. And it looked like for all the world, the Reds had my back. The Reds had my back.
They
Were
did.
going to they're going to go a solid 70 and 92. That's what kind of I was looking at. And then September came.
Yeah.
And then they lost. They bookended their incredibly loathsome season with a 4 in whatever it's been 17 stretch.
A rough patch, I think they call it. Yeah,
I'd
rough
say a rough
patch.
patch,
Yeah.
and pretty much mailed it in before it was Hunter Green coming to the rescue on Monday night, threw a 6-inning gem. They wound up winning the game 3-1 on a weird double play to end that game Monday night. So we've got two games. I've got Luis Sessa and Graham Ashcraft coming to the rescue to win one of those two games so they don't lose 100, and I don't owe Paul Dehner Jr. dinner.
And I was not like, here you accuse me of being negative.
Well,
You said you broke out the Belichick line about how the negativity in this town is making you sick. I was just pointing out, I felt like the trade deadline at that point and the schedule at the end and the give up that was going to happen was going to be probably too much to overcome and put them in that direction after that start. I thought I was wrong. I really did. I thought I was wrong until I did not take into account the September white flag factor with just the total wanting of the season to be over that would happen at the end. But that's okay. You know what? Good for them. Maybe they can scratch out a couple more wins, get the big sweep to avoid the 1-0.
So, yeah. I don't think that completely lost my train of thought. With the Bengals, with the Reds losing 7 straight. That was what I wanted to say. The Reds losing 7 straight to Pittsburgh, I was screwed. And that's when I waved the white flag.
That's a tough one to overcome. When you're on the verge of a hundo and you drop 7 in a row to the Pirates, who are somehow behind you in the standings, that tells you all you need to know.
All right, on to the Bengals.
Yes.
2 big wins to close out September after starting 0-2, and I do think they are back on the right path. I like the way, for the most part, they looked in the 2 wins. I thought they showed some signs that good teams show, that you win first with defense, and then if the offense is struggling, it'll come along. That's what I think where the Bengals are right now, and I'm not super worried yet about the run game.
Yeah, I mean, There's a lot to unpack with the run game, and I think we're all trying to right now.
Right.
As far as are they? I mean, it's the things that we're all talking about, and that people fans are talking about, is the same thing that the coaches are talking about internally of trying to figure out which buttons to push to make the run game go. It's really the one thing missing, though. I mean, everything else has kind of straightened itself out. I think they realized how teams are going to play them and kind of righted themselves in the passing game. They found ways to find explosive, thanks to the Dolphins deciding to leave man coverage on T. Higgins and give them a chance for some explosives and man coverage on Jamar Chase. And so that, for that fact, I think the passing game has kind of righted itself. And Burrow's not, like we said after the opener, Burrow's not going to have games where he turns the ball over that many times. It's not going to be a thing. That's not who he is. Not going to become that. And he hasn't. And this defense has been what I think we thought it was going to be from the very beginning, which was, really the thing that people don't talk enough about. Again, it's like this continues to go on, where it's carried them through these 4 weeks, kept the first 2 games close, and been a major factor in the last 2 wins. And that's not going away. I mean, they have depth there. They have veterans there. They can take a hit on arguably their best player in DJ Reader and keep right on trucking. And we'll see what that looks like against better offenses. And we're still yet to see them again, a full game against a starting quarterback at this point. But I don't, we saw plenty of it last year, and it's the same crew. So I don't have major reservations that all of a sudden Lamar Jackson's going to come up and they're going to put up a 35 spot on him. But I'm with you. I think that they have sort of righted the ship and tapped into the complementary football that they play, and they find ways to win. Like, there's just so much about the last 2 weeks, and really the first, honestly, when you count the first 2 weeks outside of the crazy way they ended, that felt so much like last year. I mean, the Pittsburgh game should have been a win.
Yeah.
How many times are you going to miss 2 chip shot field goals or a PAT in a 29 yarder? And then always finding a way to come back no matter the circumstances, and then have some games where you blow them out. I mean, they are yet to be blown out. I just think they have all of those same elements. It's looked weird. It's been clunky. The run game's kind of a mess, but the rest of it is still all kind of there. And you sit there at 2-2. I think you feel good.
Yeah, I do too. And it's not spectacular, but one thing I liked, and what we heard Monday, and you were in the scrum, I was in the scrum with Joe Mixon. He is showing leadership qualities, calling a meeting with the offensive line last Wednesday before the Miami game. He does want to get it right. And I think he has a desire, a drive to not only win, but contribute and feel good about his role on the team. And I think that matters to him. What did you make of his comments on Monday? He held court for 25 minutes, just talking football.
I know. Yeah. That's one thing that's always been interesting to me about Joe, is that he's a delightful guy to talk to when you do. He's not as interested in doing it all the time. But then when he does, it feels like he'll talk forever and be very open and unfiltered and genuine and nice. And so it's kind of an odd dichotomy. But that part aside, yeah, I mean, I think that's always kind of been part. It's just a weird thing with the run game here, and with Joe, not just Joe Mixon, but with the Zach Taylor, Joe Mixon run game. It's just been so streaky. I mean, they will go for like 2019.
You asked him that, as a matter of fact.
Well, and it's been like this. I mean, 2019, when they started, it was a disaster. He talked about how he was down for 2 months, and it's true. The numbers bear that out. They flew to London. They came back. They had a bunch of ideas on the table to try to spice it up. They did. He went from 3 yards per carry in the first 7 games to 4.5 yards per carry in the last 9, and sparked everything and found everything. And you thought, okay, well, they figured that out. New staff figured it out. They're going to come back in 2020. It's going to be great. And it was bad in the first part of 2020. Then he got hurt. So 2021, okay, they got it figured out. They go the first, 10 games, 11 games, and the run game is amazing. 4.5 yards per carry. 8 of their 11 games, he's over 4 yards per carry. They're just killing it. And then the final 9 games, they can't run the ball to save their life. 3.6. And out until the Super Bowl, really, did they really even get any kind of run game going consistently? And and now you're back in one of these lulls again. And so it's just they ride these waves, and it's hard to understand why. And so at least he's comfortable digging them out of a hole because he's been doing it kind of his entire career.
He has, and I just think that Mixon and the offensive line, he said yesterday, I love getting down and dirty with these guys because I think they are as committed to getting it turned around as I am. And I just get the sense that Mixon is showing the kind of patience and leadership. Yeah, he's frustrated, and he made this point to us. He's frustrated during the games because he wants the numbers. He admitted as much. He wants to be a big part of the Bengals being successful. But when he's talking to us, you don't sense that he's losing his patience. If anything, he's like, I'm going to talk this thing through with the guys that are in front of me, and we're going to get it right.
He's got a personality that's built to deal with this. I mean, he's overwhelmingly optimistic and enthusiastic dude, whether it's OTAs and he's not participating or whether it's the Super Bowl. Like, you get the same guy energy wise and enthusiasm wise. And that's important in this area where it's just a struggle. It can beat down. I mean, when you take a bunch of carries, I mean, he's got second most carries in the league. And when you take a bunch of hits and you're just pounding your head against a wall for 4 games and getting zilch out of it, it just, that can wear certain guys down, but that's not necessarily going to be the case with Joe Mixon mentally. You worry more for me physically. We're now into a latter stage of his career. He's taken a lot of carries, a lot of touches, and he's a big, powerful physical guy. How you every lull from this point forward will come with the undertone of, is this the end?
Right.
Is this the end? And maybe it's, and that doesn't mean that it is, but that's where he's at in his career now at this point. And he's not old, but by running back years, which are judged in carries and punishment taken, he's taken a lot, and you start to wonder when the end might come for Joe Mixon. And so that's maybe the only part of this that is, I think, questioned is, okay, how much of this is Mixon? And when you talk to people and you kind of watch the film, I don't think a lot of it is Mixon. I think some of it is, but I think there's just a lot of new pieces trying to figure out how to work together in a element of football that is so dependent on chemistry and time on task. And, whether it's a nudge here by a lineman or a hook here by the tight end, or Mixon understanding how La'el Collins is going to brush somebody down the line in that wide zone. It's a complicated thing. They've had 4 games together. I'm willing to give it a larger sample size than just 4.
Okay. When I hear Joe talk like he did yesterday, I start to believe that he doesn't always trust what he's seeing. Yeah. And he's waiting for that hole to open, and then he has that moment of indecision, and then the hole's gone. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I'm really wondering whether or not it's time to scrap the wide zone concept and just go behind LC, go behind La'el Collins. That's what you got him for. When he's effective and run blocking well on the right side, La'el Collins was one of the best run blockers for Zeke Elliott in Dallas that there was in football. Why not try that here? I mean, I don't think in the run game, as far as the run game is concerned, you don't have a lot to lose.
But isn't this the system that he was doing so well in Dallas? I mean, this should be where he shined. It's the system that he ran with Pollock when he was back there. I mean, it's not that different. That was always the thought, right? Is that him wiping out the backside of these wide zone runs and Mixon using his ability to cut behind him was supposed to be the superpower of them as a duo. And we haven't seen it. There was a great run. It was actually a terrible run, but it was a great example of this in the Miami game, where it was a tough spot for LC, but it was a wide zone in the lane behind LC that's supposed to be there. Was just wide open by 10, 15 yards. And there's the alley, but the guy ends up sneaking underneath Collins and blows up Mixon before he can cut it back. It's such coach speak, and we hear it over and over again. It's this close. It's one thing away, but that is the difference, right? It's one little piece one chicken wing against a guy that can allow Mixon to do that cut, and there's a 15-yard wide open alley for Mixon to cut up, and suddenly things don't feel so bad. And those are the things I think they believe they're going to get right. I have questions whether it does, and how long that's going to take, because you're now 82 reps in, but it does take time to get those things figured out. So I'm willing to say it's not totally doomed for the season, especially when you consider their history around here of having long stretches of good and bad.
So I don't know if you've seen enough of it. I have 4th and 1, running 20 yards to gain half a foot. I don't want to see that anymore. And I had fans and very loyal subscribers to this very podcast yell at me last week when I had James Rapine on, and we mentioned this, and they pointed out, well, Jamar Chase had whatever it was, 15 yards in a similar situation against the Raiders in the playoff game. What I've seen so far, the Bengals aren't capable of executing that kind of play. And I would rather see, when I see so many NFL teams in a similar situation, shortest line between 2 points is a straight line. Just go forward. And I understand that the Bengals also have trouble going forward, but I just don't want to see the stretch run on 4th and inches anymore.
They've been successful in short yardage outside of these two massive spots, in plus territory on 4th and short, 10 and 13 on short yardage. And most of them have been by doing exactly what you're saying, Trags. And I think that's the point. The interesting thing about that play was apparently it was not meant to be a pitch. It had to be bounced because your boy LC, they tried to run behind him and it didn't work. And that was where the gap was supposed to be. And but that guy coming through there forced Mixon to have to bounce at the outside to try to find something. It wasn't totally LC's fault, but it was through that gap. And so, when you're trying to run behind a double team of Lel Collins and Akeem Adeniji, and right there in that spot, okay, you're trying to run behind the butt of number 71 on short yardage, and that's where the guy comes blowing through. Man, that is frustrating, because then it ends up being what? Looks like a pitch out. You're Zach Taylor. You just got done telling people you're never going to do that again, and it ends up looking like you called a pitch out again. It is what it ended up being, but these things are always right. It's always one guy here, one guy there, one play there that makes it look awful. I agree with you that it's that focus more on just powering it up the gut and less getting cute to the outside. There is zero question about that. I'm always interested when you start finding out the story behind why things go wrong and how they went wrong, and how you just got to be like, well, certainly looks like we just called a pitch again.
Okay, I want to talk about one of the best podcasts I've heard in a long time, and any podcast, but specifically, obviously, Bengals related. It was a podcast that you had last Wednesday, I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday. Help me out here.
Yeah, it was that was on Wednesday morning. Yeah.
Okay, Wednesday morning. You had Andrew Whitworth, who was obviously in town for the Bengals Thursday night game. He's one of the Amazon NFL on Amazon Prime talents, studio talents, and they were obviously on site. And you had Big Willie Anderson, the Bengals legendary, iconic right tackle, on the same podcast. And you said it was one of the best podcasts you've ever done in terms of enjoying it and listening to the stories. If you can give us a synopsis, Paul, of some of the takeaways that made that podcast so special for you, and Jay, what would it be? What would
it's a good. Well, first of all, thank you. I was.
It was tremendous.
I didn't do much. The hard work was getting them in the room together,
Yes.
and so I knew, when Willie first was announced as the Ring of Honor person, and we knew that was going to be the case, and then all of a sudden it was, oh, Witt's going to be involved in that game. I was like, I've seen them together before. I think Willie was doing stuff at one point, and they would talk, and I knew they were really close, and I always found the interesting part of them was the parallels of their careers, just because they both were so good on teams that were not talked about because the teams weren't good. But, Witt in the late 2000s and Willie in the 90s were great players on teams that didn't get attention. And for that reason, they never got early Pro Bowls. They never got the adulation they deserved. And they were, in Willie's case, this is pre-PFF, so people aren't understanding good players on bad teams very well. And then they both found some success and finally started to get some recognition. And then they both had nasty breakups with the Bengals. And they both went on to win their first playoff games elsewhere and get some love for that. And you follow, it's just, and then they crossed over each other and really passed the torch to each other. And Willie was a big inspiration in, we always hear of players when they come in, talk about the guy who showed them the way, showed them how to be a pro. And it's usually whoever the real vet was in the room for the first couple of years of your career. And for Andrew Whitworth, that was Willie Anderson. And he's always been very grateful to Willie for that. But I'd never really heard them together telling those stories. And so I always wanted to kind of pick their brains on those situations. I had about 10 questions on my notepad that I never even got, topics that I never got near, because you can't stop them when they start going into that, it really diving into it. And it, I wasn't even involved. I mean, they were just going back and forth with each other like they were in the room. And that's what you want. Like, I felt like we had gotten the situation you always desire. You just want a microphone on the coffee table in between those two when they start really hashing it out and talking about the topic that you're interested in. I tried to float a couple of topics, and the one that got the most run was probably about their breakups with the Bengals and how they handled those. Willie talking about how it took him 10 years, and I'd heard him say some semblance of this before, but how it took him 10 years to really come to grips with that the team that he loved, that he worked so hard for, cut him. It was so personal, and it made him not like the Bengals. And not until the fans started reaching out to him and contacting him through being on social media did he let that go and realize how much he actually meant to people here. And he'd never really felt that before. And then you hear Witt say, yeah, well, I'm still in the 10-year window. Okay. And still pretty fresh cut. And how much that's still, as much as he, I think has mended fences in general and understands and appreciates Cincinnati and the organization for what they meant to him and what the Rams meant, and has great perspective. He's a guy with great perspective in general. It was clear that he still remembers every detail of being in the precinct and weighing the offers and feeling disrespected, and him and his wife saying, let's just stay. And then realizing the Bengals really don't want you. And how much that still was in his mind. Like, those details, that's just how players feel, man. And it feels personal at the end. And that was fascinating to hear them talk about the end of their careers and how they try to came to terms with the fact that the Bengals had, loved them and then told them to leave.
So, Paul, the one thing that comes to my mind first, and this is probably very unfair in my estimation of Andrew Whitworth, but I'll just say it. When I was walking down to the staging area after the Super Bowl, and I hear the first voice I hear on the field is Andrew Whitworth. And the first thing I hear him say, do you know what I'm talking about here? What I'm about
I'm trying to remember.
So I'm walking down and I just gotten down because I would not wait on the stupid freaking elevator up in the press box. I'm like, I'm walking down. So I walk down, takes me, 2 minutes, not too long. And as I get down to the staging area, I hear the press conference going on the field, the presentation on the dais on the field itself. And I hear Andrew Whitworth say, and to the Bengals, the team that gave up on me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. In that moment, that's what he's thinking about the Bengals. Sure. He's still that very bitter.
Yeah.
And that's all I needed to know about how he, when you say he's still in that 10-year window, he clearly is still in that 10-year window because he has some bitterness and frustration about the way it ended in Cincinnati.
And everybody does, right? I mean, it's like you go back to even in season, what we go up to these players when they go to play their former teams. We do it every week. It's like, oh, Chidobe Uze, you're going back to play Dallas. Like, that's got to be, and it is, right? It is for all these guys, and it would be, and it is for us. Like, look, I worked at Western Road Golf Course when I was 18 years old. I've never been fired from a job in my life, and I was not fired, but I was basically not asked to come back because they didn't like the way I was handling the snack shack. Okay, between the ninth and I still remember that. Like, I was doing a good job out there, and they were the idiots that didn't appreciate the way that I was doing it. I was 17 years old. Okay, like I understand what was going on out there, and they didn't. Okay, and by the way, that place is just a yard of weeds and mess.
It does not exist anymore.
Does not exist anymore. But they still own the land because they're idiots. Yeah. But anyway, that's a whole separate thing. I was proven correct in that. But I'm just saying, we all have that. Like, that's just in everyone's life, especially if you have any ounce of competitiveness, and you and these guys have piles of it. That stuff just never quite leaves you. And I've always been intrigued by how people feel like they handle exiting the game on a number of levels. Yeah. And it usually is you deal with not being in the spotlight anymore, and you deal with people telling you weren't good enough after everyone your entire life telling you how great you are. And that is a really hard thing for guys to handle. And I also appreciate someone like Willie, and I think Whit will eventually be there too, that comes back and is able to let it go. Corey Dillon was a famous one for that, who I was honored to be able to kind of tell his story when he decided he wanted to mend fences, 7-8 years ago. And he said, he just was done letting it bug him anymore. He was done letting that be a part of his story. And I just think that comes with time, and it comes with maturity, no matter how it ended. And it was cool to hear both of them talk through that from different sides of the line, and so for that part, I really appreciated the insight.
Willie Anderson in the Hall of Fame, a subject that's going to get a lot of airplay, a lot of words being typed about it, but to have Bill Cowher and Chris Collinsworth, among others, stepping forward and promoting him for Canton, what do you make of that?
I mean, I think it's real, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier. I mean, the bottom line is, this isn't a discussion if the late 90s Bengals aren't trash. I mean, if those teams are any good, if they have any winning seasons or any playoff run, and you have Willie plowing the way for Corey Dillon, I think they're both in the Hall of Fame. And, in Willie, in so many ways, like he says it all the time, you think I got good when I turned 30? No. I mean, they didn't start paying attention to him until he was 30. That's when he started making Pro Bowls and All Pros. You think he got good at that point? No. And I always was intrigued by PFF going back and running his career numbers. And it's hard to do when you don't have it to compare against everybody else in the league from that point. But they went back and ran his whole career, not just when they started in 2006 and how he ranked versus everybody. And that's, it's a shame that we didn't have that. But I think Andrew Whitworth will end up being the first PFF Hall of Famer. And Willie Anderson, hopefully, can kind of ride that same wave and have a shot to get in there. I don't know. It's hard, man. It's so political. I have my beef and my soapbox I get on. I won't waste your podcast time with it. I've done it a million times about the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting process. But, I hope it happens for him, because I think he was victimized by, being in a small market and being out of the eye in an era where people didn't notice those that were outside of the eye.
I want to wrap up here with the great Paul Dehner Jr., of The Athletic, covering the Bengals and the NFL. Follow him on Twitter at Paul Dehner Jr. I want to wrap up with a feel-good story, if you will, about Joe Burrow. Everything has been talked about, written about Joe Burrow on the field, but on Tuesday, he announced the launching of a nonprofit foundation, the Joe Burrow Foundation, is designed to lead charitable efforts to address food insecurity and childhood mental health. I think these are two incredibly worthwhile causes. Your thoughts on what this means for the legacy of a guy that's only been in the NFL 3 years? But if things go the way I think every Bengal fan hopes, the way the Bengals front office hopes, and he gets signed long term after this season, I think this would be a great building block in the city of Cincinnati.
Yeah, get that foundation in place before they pocket, hundreds of $1,000,000 into your bank account for sure. It's a it's well timed.
It
But
is. It is.
what's funny is I think coming out, this was always going to be a big part of Joe Burrow, the person and the player. As you saw with what he was able to do at LSU, and obviously the food pantry in Southwest Ohio, in Athens, and what the Heisman speech did for that, and how important doing the right thing and supporting the right people and caring about places that are important to him has been very much front of mind. He's very brand conscious that way and wants to help all the time. But he wanted to play first. He wanted to establish himself as a player before he got too. And I totally respect that and really understand that. And that's why I'm really, it's the one thing we haven't seen him go yet. Place we haven't seen him go yet is this. And obviously it can be something that lasts for his entire life around here and in Louisiana. And he has such a following, and people are so wanting to help and be about what he's about. On and off the field, that I'm excited to see where he takes it and what ends up happening with it. And we saw what happened in Athens, and I think it's just going to be really cool to see, how this goes about changing people's lives, because it will so many, and it could end up being a massive thing that has a legacy here beyond Joe Burrow on the field.
The reason this hits home for me, and I'm sure it does you, we both have kids, and the whole aspect of addressing childhood mental health is incredibly important post-pandemic because of what the pandemic did, how it disrupted things. And I think for a superstar athlete to come out and give his name to this specific cause is going to be incredibly helpful and worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think, he's in a unique spot to understand that and understand why this is an important cause. We're seeing now this first generation of like real social media kids becoming adults. Okay. Right. So when it became pervasive in our entire culture, no one ever really took the time to think about what this would do to kids that were involved in it. And we've seen things happen over time, but now you've got these kids, people that are Joe Burrow's age, that are in their mid-20s, who, when they were 9 or 10, was when Facebook and Twitter and everything exploded, and Instagram, and you're seeing yourself through other people's eyes and judging you, and suicide rates go up, and all this stuff that has happened. He's in a really, and I'm not surprised, but he has such a perspective on awareness of social media, and he's very much in touch with understanding the good and bad of it, and he goes dark and all those things we joke about with football. Yes. But the real effect it has on kids, I think, is important, and it's cool to see him addressing that, and he's the perfect type of person to understand that, and it'll be, I hope he continues to do good things of it, because it was someone with young girls. I am scared to death about what will happen when they have to go down that road, and I hope that we have a better world for handling it, and maybe Joe Burrow will be a part of that.
I think it's a great cause, and something that he clearly should be commended for, and I'm sure he will receive tons of support for. He is Paul Dehner. We have to wrap it up. I want to thank you, Paul, for joining me on this podcast, and I do promise you, I pay off all bets.
Yes.
Did the Reds not win their next 2 games?
We'll see.
And B, you will not have to wait whatever it's been 11 months for me to have you on my next JungleRoar podcast.
Just have me on before James again next time. That's all. It's strictly, I just want to be on before James comes on again.
Okay, so you're saying before I have James on again, I'm going to have Paul Dehner Jr.
You have to have me on. Yeah. And yeah. That's it. That's all I need. I just need to make sure that I can rub it in James' face.
His feelings are going to be so butthurt, and he'll really smile and go in the press room. And this, we'll sit in the press room and I'll go, hey, just so you know, Paul was great. I'm probably going to have him on again before you. And he's like, oh, that's fine. That's cool. And below the surface, he's going to be so freaking steaming.
I would like for actually there to be an award given for most appearances on your podcast that we can put up in it, but no one else is counted. It's just me versus James, and
there is a good question scoreboard in the Bengals press room, and we don't have to tell you who's leading that scoreboard.
Well, that was from one interview, but it's okay. I think this needs to be over the course of the rest of the season. It's just me versus James, who's made more appearances on your podcast, and I'd like to be the winner of that.
All right,
to me, and then we'll just hang it in his cubicle.
That is a discussion that will be had several times between now and the next time you are on this podcast. He is Paul Dehner Jr. Follow him on Twitter and obviously follow his incredible work along with Jay Morrison on The Athletic covering your Cincinnati Bengals. For the one and only Paul Dehner, I'm Mike Petralia Trags. Thanks for watching this episode of the JungleRoar podcast.